Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Peter Mattis. I'm the new president of the Jamestown Foundation, and this, I'm very happy to say, is the first event that I get to preside over in my tenure here. And today, I'm particularly excited that we're able to present this series of papers that Dr. Sergei Sukhankin has prepared for Jamestown on Guardians of the Belt and Road. And this builds on his previous work on private military contractors, private security contractors, on Russia's system of PMCs called War by Other Means, that profiled a number of the different groups and their activities worldwide. Today, he's talking, though, about China's private security contractors and how that world has grown quite dramatically over the last decade and has expanded in line with China's concerns about how to protect its overseas interests. I remember on October 5th, 2011, Chinese sailors on the Mekong River were were kidnapped and executed by a Burmese drug lord named Nam Kha. And this was the beginning of a real push in the Chinese system to try to figure out how they should protect growing number of Chinese individuals and companies that were going abroad. And in 2011, in 2012, and 2013 in Africa, there were a number of incidents of small terrorist attacks, kidnappings, and in some cases, there was simply a discussion in the Chinese government about how do we protect these people even if we don't know that they're there? How do we allow certain behaviors to take place? How do we protect the business? And under Xi Jinping, with a systematic effort to continue pushing companies and individuals out to export some of China's overcapacity, this question was no longer just simply one of how do we protect the Chinese people that our government needs to protect, but more of a how do we allow the protection of our policy itself that are where there's state backing to go look forward. And today, I don't think we could have a better lineup of speakers to talk about the research and also to set the stage. Um, First up, we have Nadege Roland, who is a distinguished fellow in China Studies at the National Bureau of Asian Research. She has done some incredible work in the past few years explaining the One Belt, One Road initiative and how China's leaders, the party's leaders, have envisioned the world as they would like it to be, and the policy steps that they've actually put to make those ambitions concrete. She'll set the stage for us to talk about those ambitions and the One Belt, One Road initiative. And Dr. Sergei Sukhankin will take about 15 to 20 minutes to talk about his report and the findings from his series of 9 papers, the last of which should be published uh, online on Monday. And then we have 2 wonderful experts to act as discussants. Uh, Paul Nantulia, who is a research associate at the African Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University, and Dr. Alex Arduino, who is an affiliate lecturer at the Lao China Institute at King's College London and a member of the International Code of Conduct Association. He's also the author of Money for Mayhem, Mercenaries, Private Military Companies, Drones, and the Future of War. And between between Paul and Alex, I think we have two of the world's experts in sort of a functional and in China's activities abroad coming together to discuss it. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you, Nadege.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to see you. I'm delighted to be invited to set the scene for today's conversation. And I just wanted to start with sharing some of my surprise, because who would have thought 10 years ago that what was then called One Belt, One Road would generate so much international interest and cause so much ink to flow. And what is even more surprising to me is that despite all of that, and despite this 10 years of experience, Belt and Road is still very widely misunderstood internationally. What has started off as two separate announcements, almost buried in Xi Jinping's speeches in Kazakhstan and in Indonesia at the end of 2013, each of them launching one part of the Belt and the Road, the Silk Road Economic Belt, the continental part, and the 21st Maritime Silk Road, the maritime part of this initiative, became known by the end of 2015 as the BRI, of the Belt and Road Initiative, just to conceal. I mean, this is a conscious effort to conceal the strategic intent that is behind the project. A white paper that has been published just a few weeks ago, the first white paper on the BRI, mentions in writing that the ultimate goal of the BRI is to help build a global community of shared future. It provides, the paper says, a platform for turning China's vision for improving global governance into reality. So if this was not clear enough before, BRI is not an infrastructure building project. It is, and despite the official denials, recurring denials that it is not a geostrategic concept, it is indeed a grand strategy. Its objective is geopolitical. It is about reforming the global governance system, and it's about putting China back at the center of the world it envisions. The objective is not to bring development assistance to countries in need, but to support this vision that Xi Jinping laid out in 2017 at the Party Congress of putting China back at the center of the world stage. So maybe I thought I would go back a little in time to remind us what was the strategic environment like that prompted Beijing to launch the One Belt, One Road idea. You need to go back to the years prior to 2012, when Xi Jinping comes to power, and realize that this is it's a crucial period for Beijing. We are still in the post-global financial crisis period. At the end of 2012, China's foreign reserves are hitting $3.3 trillion. The economic growth is still around 8%, a little bit under 8% at that time. China has overtaken the Japanese economy in 2010 to become the second world economy. So in Beijing, there's really a sense of optimism in China's own trajectory. It's upward. China has been going on this very good economic growth. Its material power is growing. And at the same time, despite this optimism, Beijing sees more external pressure coming on its rise. And the first of that is the announcement by the US of the pivot or rebalancing to Asia, which is assessed by the strategic planners in Beijing as an increased pressure on China's maritime flank in East Asia. At the same time, in the Middle East, we have a series of Jasmine revolutions called color revolutions by Beijing's strategic planners, which also gives a sense of insecurity from Beijing's part. So this is a period that leads, it's a great ferment to internal discussions about China's rising power, its also the constraints that are that China is going to face increasingly as its power rises, and what to do with this power, how to transform it into something that is more China-centric and more beneficial to China's own interests and vision for the future. The conclusion of these very intense debates and discussions at home is that China needs to expand its strategic space well beyond its traditional neighborhood and well beyond the traditional domains of international activities that China has done so far. So Belt and Road really is not an infrastructure building program, as I mentioned before. It is the translation in concrete terms of this vision and of this expansion of China's strategic space. It has, as you know, 5 connectivities: policy coordination. The second one is infrastructure building, but it's also about generating more trade with China. It's about financial integration, and there's the people-to-people component that's also very important, especially when you know that in Beijing's mind for the CCP, there is no such thing as people-to-people. It's state, party state to people. So it's a state-led effort as well. Already back in 2015, in the various action plans that are published by the Chinese government, you can see that there's a wide array of corporations that are envisioned that go well beyond infrastructure building or lending, including maritime cooperation, health, global health, education, science and technology, industrial standards, agriculture, etc. The amount of domains of cooperation is also very, very long. In addition to this sort of very comprehensive vision for global governance, getting into various domains, there is a very visible geographic expansion of the scope of activities as well. BRI or OBOR starts mostly focused on the Eurasian continent. That's why my book back then was called China's Eurasian Century, because it really looked like it was something that was focused on the Eurasian continent, 65 countries, 64 plus China, so 65 countries mainly. And then after a few years, just expanding up to 150 now, or 153, I'm not sure at this point what the count is. The 6 economic corridors that are sort of radiating from like spokes from the Chinese hub all the way through the Eurasian continent down to Southeast Asia and South Asia, are then complemented by 3 blue economic passages that go down to Oceania, the South Pacific, and up to the Arctic Circle. It also includes, very early on, starting around 2015, the new strategic frontiers that were defined in the mid-2000s as the polar regions, the deep sea, cyberspace, and outer space, in the form of the Arctic Silk Road, the digital Silk Road, and in information corridor. So from Eurasia, then it expands to Latin America, to Africa, to Oceania around 2017. So what we really see is this expansion of the interest and of the geographic scope of the Belt and Road Initiative. In conclusion, really what we can see is that this project has been pushing the boundaries of China's national interests. It's exactly what you said, Peter, in your introduction, well beyond China's traditional horizons, and including in regions that can be very volatile and potentially putting at risk the safety of a growing number of Chinese businesses, workers, assets, but also beyond that, also not just the hard infrastructure, not just the people, but also the security, the ideological security as well as defined by the party state. The overall acceleration and geographic expansion of Chinese overseas activities will inevitably generate the need for some level of state and military protection, with some limitations for the Chinese party state as long as its military capabilities are still growing. And this is why I think the focus that this study is putting on the private security companies, and I hope you will define the word private in the discussions here, is so crucial to understand, because they're going to be probably the main actors in trying to secure the Belt and Road Initiative and to provide this sense of security for the project of the century, as Xi Jinping calls it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadej, for that great introduction and the reminder that if you just look at what certain kinds of development loans are going out, that you're not actually getting a picture of the BRI and the full scope of activity that's there. In some sense, I think we have to accept the CCP's definition of a private company that's simply anything less than 50% owned, which means that there is often a heavy party state role in a lot of industries, and some have more or less party involvement. You know, as I think they consider commercial space to be anything that's not 100% owned by the PLA. So, anyways, now over to you, Sergey, to discuss your study. I think we'll all be interested in all of the different things that you have to say about what's going on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. This is my great pleasure to be able to share my insights and results of this study, and be able to do this in the panel of such distinguished experts of China and Chinese policies. So Josh, if you could share the slides, please. Okay, great, excellent, thank you very much. So this project, can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, so I decided to divide my today's presentation onto the three following parts. So first, I will introduce you to the essence of this project and the main research question that I was trying to go through in scopes of the project. Then I will talk about some of the most important, some of the most essential findings that I came up with while working on the project through the analysis of both secondary data as well as primary data with through the interviews with some of the panelists who are present today. And in the final analysis, I will talk about what this all means, what these developments mean from the strategic point of view, why this is important, how important it is, and whether the United States should be worried about the development or the trends that are taking place in the realm of Chinese private security companies industry. Could we go to the next slide, please? Yes, and the next one. So yes, now I'll talk about the essence of the project and then the research question and the scope of the project. So the next slide, please. Yes, so the main goal of this project was to explore the role of Chinese private security companies as a key element in protecting Chinese interests in economically promising but extremely challenging, primarily from the security point of view, areas integral to the Belt and Road Initiative. And as you can see, the complexity of the goal of the project lies in the fact that the Belt and Road Initiative as such stretches well beyond the Eurasian continent. It goes through a number of other areas where the political climate, the range of political challenges and issues, it is really boiling. So if we could go to the next one, the next slide, please. So starting this project, I posed the following main research objectives that I was planning to attain through this project. So the first main research objective was concerned with the examination of this brief history, the emergence and then evolution of the Chinese private security companies. So I was interested in tracing and following the path of Chinese private security companies, some historical background, how they emerged, what were the main milestones in the development of this phenomenon. The second major research objective was to try to compare maybe and try to fit in Chinese private security companies into the global private military and security companies industry. And more specifically, as Peter mentioned before, prior to this project, James Town and myself, we conducted a very large, in-depth study about Russian quasi-private military companies, focusing primarily on the Wagner Group as well as other companies. And when working on this project, I was always trying to compare the Russian experience and the Russian model with the Chinese private security companies. And obviously, while doing so, I was also taking a look at how the global, or more specifically, the Western private military and security companies industry, how it's been developing. So that was the second major objective of the study. The third main objective was to discuss weaknesses, strength, and prospects of Chinese private security companies in defending Chinese economic, business, and geopolitical interests along the Belt and Road Initiative. And the fourth main research objective, which constituted the core, the main essence of the whole project, was to trace specific activities of Chinese private security companies in several most essential, most critical macro regions through doing the following selected case studies. The Central Asia, where special attention was paid to Kyrgyzstan, although, of course, in the scopes of this study, I talked about other examples or other activities, proven or sometimes unproven, of Chinese private security companies in this strategically essential macro region, not only to China, but to a number of other actors, including Russia, Turkey, as well as some other actors. The second important macro region that I scrutinized was the Sub-Saharan Africa. And here I have two different reports. One of them analyzed activities of Chinese private security companies in the Anglophone Africa, and the second one primarily concentrated on activities of Chinese PSCs in the Francophone and Lusophone countries, with whom China has built very strong economic ties. Another macro region that was also explored in scopes of the project was the MENA region, and Iraq and South Sudan were paid particular attention in many ways, of course, based on the fact that these regions, these portions of the MENA region are endowed with strategic natural resources that are essential for the Chinese economy. Another macro region was South Asia, where I decided to go with the case of Pakistan, and I had a series of interviews with leading experts from Pakistan who specialize not only on the domestic affairs, on the security climate in the country, but also on activities of foreign actors, and more specifically China in this country. And finally, I decided to go for and analyze developments and activities of Chinese PSCs in Latin America and the Caribbean, that also in a way kind of belongs to this Belt and Road Initiative. Could we go to the next slide, please? And while working on this project, and again, it warrants a comparison with my previous project on Russia, it was also hard to find some fact-based information. But in case of China, I think that was even more complex. It was even harder to do because the Russian side has been using the Wagner Group as a part of its informational campaign starting from at least 2019. But the Chinese side takes a very, very different approach here. And here are three main strategic hurdles that I encountered while working on this project. So the first main issue, the first main challenge was associated with the fact that the Chinese private security companies practice and follow a very different model and very different operation. They employ very different operational tactics than either the Russian quasi-private military companies or Western private military and security companies. So in many ways, it is quite hard to accurately trace down their footprints and their actual activities in many countries and in many regions. So some notable cases were, of course, discussed in the series of reports that I published, but some of them warrant additional or extra research. The second major hurdle was visible lack in literature, especially secondary literature resources. So there is only a few studies available that specifically discuss activities of Chinese private security companies. And as one of the interviews, one of the leading experts in the realm of Chinese private security companies told me there is just a handful of international experts who work in the area, who have been working in the area. So definitely, of course, this posed a challenge of quite limited pool of secondary sources. And the final hurdle that I encountered was the current stage, a combination of the current stage of development in the domain, in the realm of Chinese private security companies, and certain hesitation on behalf of the Chinese state whether and how to use this tool in protecting Chinese interests, Chinese economic, business, security interests abroad. I will elaborate on this on the next slide. So could we go to the next slide, please? Yes, and now what I will do, I will share with you some of the key findings that I deduced from this project, and I think that the period of validity of these findings could be viewed as true for the next maybe 5-8 years, because the security situation is different across different regions. Things develop really may develop in a very, very rapid way. So I think that in the next 5-8 years, those findings, again, this is just my opinion, could be valid. So could we go to the next slide, please? So the first major conclusion, the first major corollary that I came up with is the difference between the scope of the Chinese private security companies industry and the actual level of capabilities that actors within the industry build. So based on the study, based on my interviews and analysis of primary and secondary data, what I found is that the Chinese private security companies industry is today is the largest one in the world. It has more than 7,000 different entities, and they employ more than 4 million security personnel. Although, of course, and I found we actually discussed this with Alessandro in one of my initial interviews, their level of proficiency as well as their staffing practices are very, very different from what we can see in Russia or among Western private military and security companies. So instead of the Russian model, where we have battle-hardened warriors, people who have taken parts in various regional conflicts, starting from Afghanistan, back to Afghanistan, to Chechnya, then a series of other wars or Western practices. Many people who worked for or within in scopes of Chinese private security companies sector, many of them are not professional military. Many of them come from local police. Some come from sporting clubs. So the level of their competences and their experience is obviously not at the same level as what we can see in Western, let alone the Russian model. Very few of these entities could be classified as genuine private security companies with, and this is very important, with necessary expertise and experience suitable for international activities. So basically, it's just a handful, very few of them really fall within this realm, those companies that can perform certain security-related missions abroad. Then, of course, again, and I reiterate the same point, when we juxtapose Chinese private security companies with Western or Russian analogs, definitely there is a huge precipice, there is a huge difference in terms of skills, experience, knowledge of the local environment, as well as their readiness to perform functions that are typically allocated to Russian or Western security providers. So as a conclusion, in my opinion here, I don't think most likely these entities will not be ready to fully ensure physical security of Chinese nationals or Chinese material assets abroad, given the nature of challenges that these companies or the Chinese face when they operate, when they work abroad. And again, you can go back to my reports, especially on the MENA region and sub-Saharan Africa, as well as parts of Central Asia. Could we go to the next slide, please? The second important thing that, conclusion or takeaway point that I can make from this study is the difference between costs and benefits of deploying Chinese private security companies abroad. So what I found out, what I saw is that many countries, even those that are strategically dependent and hugely indebted to China, such as, for instance, Pakistan or Tajikistan, many of them seriously opposed to the idea of the deployment of Chinese private security companies on their territory, even though that sometimes they are unable, and I think it's visible in the case of Pakistan, to ensure physical security of Chinese nationals working in the country. The Chinese side has come up with several requests to the Pakistani authorities to maybe try to probe the deployment of Chinese PSCs on the Pakistani soil on a permanent basis. But what I found again out from the series of interviews with local journalists and security experts is that Pakistani society, as well as Pakistani political and military elites, they strongly oppose to the idea of the deployment of Chinese security personnel on their territory. The second important takeaway point here is that in case China increases its pressure on other countries in maybe Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, in pursuit of deployment of their private security contractors on their soil, this is likely to result in increasing xenophobia and may even damage the reputation of the Chinese, of China, in such areas as Sub-Saharan Africa. So getting back to the xenophobia aspect, in scopes of my study, I found out that despite being strategically dependent on China economically and in a way politically, many countries of Central Asia, including Kazakhstan, sometimes there are cases in Kyrgyzstan, there are instances of xenophobia in these areas, in these regions, and the Chinese have been very, very, very careful and very discreet when asking the local authorities to enable them to deploy private security personnel. Same thing with the Sub-Saharan Africa, where following the series of wars during the decolonization process and now the doings, the activities of the Wagner Group in this area. So this all has left a visible historical, visible trauma on the population of many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the idea of deployment of foreign security personnel, especially again given the developments with the Wagner Group, this does not lead to any enthusiasm on behalf of sub-Saharan nations. And what is also important is that in scopes of my study, I found out that today in many countries of sub-Saharan Africa, China is viewed as positively as the United States. And definitely the Chinese do not want to kind of destroy this reputation in sub-Saharan Africa. So trade and commerce, economics will be the main tool. And the final conclusion, the final aspect here is even if Chinese private security companies are to be deployed in certain areas on a permanent basis in order to protect lives and physical, the Chinese personnel, I don't think that it is highly likely that they will be able to solve security challenges that are faced by Chinese businesses. In addition to kidnapping for ransom, things like this, the Chinese will continue facing the issue of terrorism. And if you go back to the Russian model, you will see that certain attempts of the Russians in sub-Saharan Africa, including Mozambique, they failed. So the Chinese private security companies, at least in the form, at least at the current level, at the current stage, they are unlikely to be able to effectively deal with these kind of challenges. At the same time, again, the deployment may result in some negative aspects that I have just mentioned, such as increasing and rising xenophobia, which, for instance, in Kazakhstan, I think 2019 was called the year of xenophobia in the country, or damaged reputation, such as in sub-Saharan Africa or in other countries. Could we go to the next slide, please? And the third main aspect is the main operational areas that certain Chinese private security companies are working in. So some of them at least work in both land and maritime. They perform both land and maritime activities, which is quite interesting, quite remarkable, because, for instance, the Russian private military companies, they, for now at least, they stay away from any maritime activities. They concentrate heavily on land operations. They choose when they, even when we have instances of them working in specific areas and specific countries, such as, for instance, Kyrgyzstan or Pakistan, or countries of the Latin America. So what they do, they tend to collaborate with the local security providers. Again, one of the reasons is that the domestic governments do not want them to be deployed there on a permanent basis. But another reason is that the Chinese private security companies, again, in their current shape, in their current form, they do not have necessary expertise and necessary knowledge of the local environment. What I discussed with Paul extensively when we talked about sub-Saharan Africa is what we can see is that the Chinese PSCs heavily concentrate on protection and training of local personnel in consular posts, in embassies. There is also another very interesting phenomenon that is quite widespread in sub-Saharan Africa as well as in Latin America, is Chinese police outposts. We don't, at least I did not see a direct tie, a direct connection and visible collaboration between Chinese PSCs and Chinese police outposts. But there are theories, there are ideas, there are certain materials that this collaboration does take place. So, concluding this point, I would like to make a kind of the following conclusive forecast, that instead of developing paramilitary or military skills in strategically essential, strategically important areas, Chinese private security companies are likely to increase their role in such operational domains as drones, surveillance, information security. So I don't think that in the short-term prospect, in the next couple of years, they will be performing the same operational tasks and functions that are vested in the hands of such entities as Patriot PMC, the Russian Patriot PMC, or the Wagner Group, or other companies. Likely, again, they will concentrate on these areas. Could we go to the next slide, please? And in the final analysis, I know that I've stepped beyond my time limit, but I'll be very quick here. So strategic meaning and implications of these trends, of these developments. Could we go to the next slide? Yes. So the first major strategic implication and the main conclusion that we can make here is that Chinese private security companies in their current form should be viewed perhaps as a stepping stone to something else. Currently, I would say that the intent of the Chinese side to use and to delegate certain functions, certain roles to Chinese private security companies working abroad is more important than the actual developments. The second major conclusive remark that I make here is that Chinese private security companies should not be viewed as an immediate direct threat on their own. In my view, in my opinion, the function that they are performing and that they will be performing for the next couple of years will be mostly an auxiliary tool, so an auxiliary role to other Chinese endeavors. And China is planning mainly to rely on economics, business, and other types of contacts, while PSCs will be allocated secondary or maybe even tertiary role here. The third major conclusion is basically there is a visible uncertainty among American policymakers how to react, how to respond to the Chinese experimentations with private security companies working abroad. And through a series of interviews of both notable American policymakers who work in the realm of China and Chinese security, as well as local journalists, local security experts, what I can say is that the majority converge on the following opinion. So the United States should probably not pressure hosting nations, because this will damage the reputation and further damage the image of the United States. Obviously, the United States needs to be alert, needs to follow the developments, but it should avoid, at least at that stage, in the current form of the Chinese PSCs, from dealing or applying more pressure on the hosting nations, because again, as I said before, many of them already do not feel comfortable with having Chinese PSCs on their soil on a permanent basis. And the final element, the final thing here is that the development of Chinese PSCs is most likely, again, based on the results of this study, will take a more of an incremental process. So their actions should not be viewed as a matter of immediate concern. Although, again, there are definitely certain risks of them potentially collaborating maybe with Russian security providers in Africa and in some maybe other countries, but that's a separate story. And if you want me, I could reflect on this later in the Q&A session. On this, thank you.
For that very detailed set of remarks about your findings and covering the gamut. Just to answer a question was put in, a number of the papers are already up online, and the final paper will be published no later than Monday. And we'll make sure that everyone who signed up for the event so they can see the final paper in this series. So now I want to turn it over to Paul to make some comments on the study and perhaps offer a question or two.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thanks, Sergey. It's nice to be on a panel. I know all the panelists, worked with them, and so this is a very, very good and important engagement. Certainly a very good way to spend my Friday morning out here in Washington, D.C. Let me start out by joining Nadej in her. Nadej has consistently made 2 points about One Belt, One Road. The first point is that it is an initiative that is here to stay. So there's been a lot of speculation about the lending. Lending has been decreasing, the state of the Chinese economy. This initiative was too ambitious. And now there's a reality check in China. And there are new concepts like the Global Security Initiative, which Xi Jinping outlined, as well as the Global Development Initiative. So China is basically moving away from One Belt, One Road. Like Nadej, I do not think this is true. I think this initiative, yes, it will continue to evolve. It will continue to react to political and geostrategic pressure and issues. But it will continue. I think there is a commitment within the Communist Party. I was in a meeting with a Chinese colleague about 2 weeks ago, and I asked this question, and the response was, well, it's like, and I think Xi Jinping has described it in very interesting terms, where, with Chinese calligraphy, you start with a splash, and it's not very well defined. The figures, the characters are not very well defined initially as you work your way. So it's sort of like a splash, and then as you move along, the figures, your paintbrush, the figures become much more detailed. So right now, One Belt, One Road is moving to that next phase where it's much more detailed. It's less of a big bang, and much more targeted, which is exactly what we see. So that's the first point. The second point is this focus on money and projects and construction. It ignores the larger strategic relevance and outline of this particular project or strategy. So I just want to underscore that. In terms of buy-in, I was in Tanzania for about a month, and while I was there, there was a huge high-level meeting. The Tanzania government was hosting a Belt and Road forum focused on East Africa as part of the commemorative activities of the 10th year of the Belt and Road. And this was, it was open to East African countries. There was the East African community there, very important cabinet officials, the members of parliament and so on. And of course, the Chinese embassy was there, and the Chinese entities and Chinese state-owned enterprises as well. So just to show that, and there were quite a number of other countries that have done the same thing this year. So just to show that we're basically in a state of One Belt, One Road 2.0. I don't think it's a dead initiative. It's included in the party charter. And again, going back to the conversation I had with the Chinese colleagues, it's included in the Chinese in the party charter. And well, I guess one can push back and say, well, you have other concepts that are included in the party charter that are really not, nobody really talks about them. Hu Jintao's scientific development perspective, and then the three represents of Jiang Zemin. But we were reminded by Chinese colleagues that One Belt, One Road is different because it is a concrete expression of Chinese strategy. It has a budget, it has money involved, it has institutions that are implementing it, so it cannot really be compared to a governing concept. So I think I just wanted to start out by throwing those ideas out. The second point I would state, and I guess going back to Sergey and the conversations that you and I have had along the way, is the concept of private military company or private security company. I think in the Chinese context, the term private is it's rather convoluted in the sense that the law establishing these firms clearly states that the party state must be the majority shareholder in these entities. So this is the first aspect of the law. The second aspect is the key security organs like the Ministry of Public Security have a sense of oversight, if you will, over these entities. Now, of course, going down to the ground, that it doesn't always work out that way. But nevertheless, there is a heavy party state involvement, and in any case, the majority of people that are recruited into these security firms are ex People's Liberation Army, ex People's Armed Police, in some cases ex Special Forces. So I think that's the other element I wanted to throw out, and you do address this, Sergey. You do address this in your report. The third element is the aversion of the People's Liberation Army in assuming a more muscular role, a more muscular posture in Latin America, in South Asia, and even in Africa. I think there's still that aversion. The PLA has been talking to itself within the establishment. If one looks at the writings in the Academy of Military Science, the PLA has been quite open. It hasn't hidden the fact that it still believes that it does not have the logistical and the power projection capabilities of the US military. The PLA always benchmarks itself against the US military and just does not believe that it can protect all these entities, Chinese personnel and all these companies. I mean, there are about 10,000 in Africa and so on, cannot really provide a security blanket. Doesn't believe it's there yet. And there are also political and ideological constraints. People don't react very well to Chinese boots on the ground unless they're in a peacekeeping mission. I think this is quite clear. So Beijing is really reacting to that. But then there's also losing face and gaining face. You know, you've got to do these things professionally, and you know, you cannot embarrass yourself. And I think there's a sense that the PLA, you know, the PLA establishment, there's a sense that the PLA is really not there. Yes, it's the biggest army in the world. It has improving and you know, increasingly sophisticated capabilities that should not be dismissed. But nevertheless, there's a sense that the PLA still has a ways to go. So this creates a dilemma, frankly, for the Chinese, which brings me to the fourth point. And again, you know, looking at Sergey's work and the conversations we've had, what to do about this, right? So what I call a blended or a mixed security approach is, I think this is sort of the outline that we're starting to see. You cannot deploy the PLA. You don't want to put the PLA, you know, you don't want to have that muscular role, especially in places like Africa and Latin America. So then you begin to work more tightly with host nation security forces, and I think Alex has written about this also. If we look at what happened to the Chinese miners in the Central African Republic recently in Chimbolo, in those mines. The Central African defense forces were not able to provide that security. It's just as simple as that. Now, China has been engaged in that country, training the police, even training the presidential guard, right? But the Central African Republic armed forces were just not up to the task, right? So, again, it's part of the security mix that we're seeing. And the Central African Republic is not the only country. We can talk about South Sudan, we can talk about Ethiopia, we can talk about Sudan itself, where we've had instances where these firms have been deployed. But I don't see this problem getting better over the next 5 to 8 years. So again, there's that strategic dilemma that will continue to impact the thinking and the calculus of the Chinese government. But at the same time, these state-owned enterprises, which are the ones that have the security budgets, and they're the ones that hire these security firms, unless the firms are hired directly by embassies, it's the state-owned enterprises, the Chinese state-owned enterprises that hire these firms, right? That's where the money is. But these CEOs of these firms also have some muscle within the Communist Party architecture, and they've been putting quite a bit of pressure on the Communist Party to take on a more muscular role. So I think, again, this is part of the larger dilemma. Let me conclude by adding to Sergei's closing remarks, because yes, I agree that it's inadequate. I agree with you that these Chinese entities, do not have the experience. There's linguistic problems and so on. But I would add policing to that mix, because I think if you look at certainly on the African continent, if you look at the strides the Chinese government has been making with regard to policing, I would look at policing as another complementary activity as part of that security mix to be able to provide some kind of security blanket for Chinese interest. Ethiopia has signed an MOU with the Ministry of Public Security to defend and protect Belt and Road interest in that country. We have seen Chinese and Ugandan special forces in an operation last year in that country. We've seen similar activity with Angola. We've seen similar activities in Morocco and Egypt. So I would say, let's add policing as part of the mix, because as long as we do not, as long as the Chinese, certainly on the Chinese side, do not believe that host nation forces have the capacity and their security firms have got the capacity, policing really becomes a key element. So I think these are the 5 things that I would add to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Dr. Adrino, if you would like to add your thoughts to the conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me. First, please allow me to congratulate with Sergei, because his work resonates extremely well with what Nadezhda just mentioned at the beginning. If we look at the BRI, at basically a grand strategy, we need to stop to look at Chinese private security just with tactical lenses. We need to see Chinese private security as part of this grand strategy. So basically, Sergei is one of the few analysts and researchers who put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Was this tendency to look just in Balochistan, in Pakistan, near Afghanistan, or part in the MENA region or in Africa. Sergei's work put all the pieces of the puzzle together, especially looking at South America and the Caribbean, an area that is not enough studied and will have severe repercussion in the near future. Having said that, where Sergei's work stops, the next question is, what next? There is some discussion that private security are not able, not capable. Yes, if we look at the bigger number, but if we look at the tiny percent of the one that operate abroad, they are increasingly getting good at their job, because they are not managing to have Chinese armed personnel, but they are becoming really good in choosing the right partner the armed one, the local one, that can be army, that can be armed militia, or foreign private military and security company. And this especially in areas that are heating up pretty fast for the Belt and Road. As Nadej mentioned, and also Paul mentioned, the Belt and Road changed since the last 10 years. When President Xi Jinping addressed the father of the nation in Kazakhstan, President Nazarbayev, in 2013, was a different country. Now the father of the nation is no more there. Middle East is on fire. Africa, especially in Sahel area and region, is threatening on daily basis Chinese worker. And what Paul underlined, for example, in Central African Republic is very important, because we have not only state actor, but also non-state actor. And there was some finger pointing even at the Wagner Group, having conducted a killing mission against the miner. It's not been proved, but just 1 week later, the Wagner Group had a kind of photo op rescuing Chinese miners from the jungle. So this is quite interesting if we look from now on, based on Sergei's work, what's next? In which area the PSC are going to evolve, and with the strategical thinking, what is going to be the impact in several areas of the Belt and Road. Again, let me underline, in a time when the security, the global security architecture is changing, not for the good, rising uncertainty, China now cannot free ride on the US security umbrella, as the US is moving toward an offshore security balancer role. But then again, ready or not, Chinese private security are going to protect the Belt and Road Initiative. So if we look at this direction, how we can try to forecast, something that I've been done when I was preparing my book that Peter graciously mentioned at Money for Mayhem, looking at how the Chinese security expert and Chinese academic were discussing in Chinese language in China, how they perceive the private security. And the discussion is quite straightforward. There are two pressure points. One is internal, principle of non-interference, and even the older one from Mao, the party controlled the gun. And Chinese private security need to manage when they go outside to still abide by these two principles. And the third one, and the one that is outside, an increase uncertainty and insecurity against Chinese worker. So if you look, for example, at Afghanistan, I'll give a great example, because when the US-led security forces left the country, then Islamic State in Khorasan province put China as the main target. And in other area where Chinese private security company were thinking that it was quite easy to protect Chinese investment in Africa, now the new security and the new problem that are rising cast a question mark, a big question mark, if they are able to protect, especially against criminal violence, kidnapping and ransom, and so on. So looking at all these quite fast changing landscape, I think if we want to forecast what's next for the Chinese private security sector, and I'm not going to discuss when public end and private start, otherwise we need a couple of hours more and we don't get out of that. But then there are two issues that can give us, let's say, some variable, essential variable to forecast what's going to happen next. The first is Xi Jinping Global Security Initiative. Does the PSC have a space in the GSI? Yes or no? And one very important is, and Paul underlined it extremely well, in my opinion, the PLA unwillingness to more muscular role at the present. But we don't have to forget that President Xi called for the PLA to become a world-class force by 2049. And then, in my opinion, and of course, as I work on PSC, I'm obsessed with PSC and PMC, it calls into question to what degree the Chinese private security sector will be part of the equation. Let me give you a couple of examples. One, and it's already starting, safeguarding Chinese port outside China, safeguarding sea lane of communication, anti-piracy, collecting critical intelligence in area when there is a Chinese diaspora, Chinese living abroad, and so on. And then what Sergei mentioned, that's quite important, this kind of auxiliary role. PLA Navy has been increasingly good in exfiltrating Chinese worker in area that are under threat, but all the mission, all the non-combatant evacuation operation, or NEO, has been all carried with the ship arriving at the dock. Then, in that respect, private security, Chinese private security, can provide that kind of boot on the ground that the PLA is unable or unwilling to perform. So to make it short, I would love, and I'm asking to Sergey, apologies for that, the $1 million question. Chinese private security for a while have been flirting with Blackwater model. I know that in your research you spoke even with Eric Prince, so you know very well what you're talking about. And then for a brief time, there's been also some Russian PMC, I'm not talking about Wagner, Moran and so on, Slavonica Corp, that offered their service to the Chinese private security sector and SOE. Now, of course, what Prigozhin did in the armed mutiny, it's quite straightforward and very well known in Beijing. In your opinion, Sergey, is this Chinese PSC with Chinese characteristic are going to lean on which one of the two model or nothing at all? Thank you.
Well, Sergey, if you want to start with Alex's question, and then I'll go through some of the questions that have been submitted in the chat. And again, reminder for anyone who wants to ask a question, please submit it, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So over to you, Sergey.
Thank you very much, Alex. That's a great question, and that was kind of another area that I wanted to clarify or try to approach, at least in scopes of my research. And indeed, well, there are certain considerations that can be viewed against leading to either model. So, for instance, if the Chinese private security companies evolve in the same model what we have in Russia, I think, in my opinion, this is unthinkable for several main reasons. Well, the first one is that the Russian, the personnel that have been employed by the Wagner Group or also others, Vedut PMC, or maybe even the Patriot PMC, all of them are battle-hardened warriors. Again, many of them well, their experience stretches back to the war in Afghanistan, then the two Chechen wars, the war in Syria, in Libya, and then in Ukraine. I don't think that China or Chinese security providers have enough personnel, or at least any personnel, who have similar, at least somewhat similar experience that members of the Russian PMCs have. So this is one. The second important thing is that the reputation of the Wagner Group and of the Russian Federation after its use or multiple cases of violations of international law, international humanitarian law, and the way how they handled conflicts, regional conflicts, I think it was badly hurt in many ways. And that's what we are seeing today in Kazakhstan and in many countries, in Armenia. So I'm not saying that they're completely departing away from Russia, no, but definitely they will be much more cautious. And the use of PMCs was one of those factors that has had this repelling effect, this repelling impact. And China is definitely not planning to do this, because China wields significantly more economic, financial power. It has, in my view, again, it has much stronger soft power, including in Africa, today in Central Asia, and China does not want to risk with this over doing something like Wagner or Russia through the Wagner Group. Today, Russia is viewed in many ways as a pariah state. A state we can see who its main supporters are, what regimes support Russia, and China does not want to follow that model. And obviously, there are certain restrictions, certain problems with the Western approach with Blackwater type of organization, because well, it's unthinkable in Chinese conditions on the first hand, because the level of information security and the level of information opaqueness in China is incomparable with what we have in the West. The main problem of the Blackwater and some of Western private military security companies was a relatively high level of exposure to information. Each and every, or many, at least many incidents became public knowledge very, very quickly. And obviously, it also tainted the reputation of not just the Blackwater or specifically Erik Prince, but rather it was projected on the United States. Again, this speaks against China willing to rely maybe on this model. I think that for now, for the next 5-8 years, or maybe even longer, the Chinese side will be pursuing the same approach that it has been pursuing with PSCs and activities in other countries. I think that economics, trade, information exchange, know-how will be the main drivers of Chinese foreign economic policy. And when it comes to the security domain, I think that the majority of contacts will be done through the levels of ministries, respective ministries of defense. This is something that we can see in the case of Pakistan, and especially in the case of Central Asia, where the Chinese, again, they are using, it's a known fact that they do have certain PSCs working in Kyrgyzstan, but this is done in a way, I would say, that is hidden from the eyes of the majority of people, because the absolute majority of people would definitely be against this. You mentioned Kazakhstan under Nazarbayev, and what is interesting that in 2015 or 16 or 17, I remember that the daughter of Nazarbayev actually spoke against the presence of any foreign security personnel in the country. She said that Kazakhstan is a very different story, and we don't want any foreign security personnel to be present there. Same thing goes to other countries of Central Asia. For instance, Uzbekistan, I spoke with one outstanding expert on Uzbekistan. He said that basically he doesn't see any way how the Chinese would put their private security companies in the country, because the Uzbek government takes pride in having one of the strongest military and security personnel in the whole region. I mean, in among Central Asian countries. So this, in his view, it may be unthinkable. Again, we'll see how this evolves, how this develops. So I hope this clarifies, answers my question, at least in a way.
So I want to take one of the questions we have in the chat and put it to Nadezh. And Sergey, you actually provided the perfect transition to this, which is that for the entire existence of the PRC, they've championed sovereignty and non-interference. So how do they, in your sense, how do they justify some of the increasingly intrusive things that the party state is doing in these countries as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative?
I guess it goes together with the expansion of the definition of what constitutes security for the CCP. I'm going to refer back to your work, Peter, because you were one of the first who identified this in the I think it's one of the intelligence laws almost 10 years ago, that defined security as the absence of threat, which is impossible to realize. And so such an expansive definition of the absence of threat is a justification for that kind of activity. I think non-interference, we've seen a lot of examples of interference from the Chinese Communist Party side that takes various forms, including the United Front and influence operation activities. It's not necessarily all in the form of military uniformed officers with boots on the ground. There is still, I believe, a certain reluctance from the party state to actually display its military force in overseas countries. And what Alessandro just said about the and also Sergey just said about some of these people from private security companies are actually stationed abroad, but they're mostly hidden. That's a convenient way of having those potential intermediaries, or what Sergey said about this, like auxiliaries to the military, to the PLA. as, ears and eyes on the ground, as potential intermediaries in the case of a crisis. And I think this is what we're talking about. I guess there's still the problem of China being also constrained by its image, international image, and normative constraints as well. But it doesn't mean that it's not trying to figure out creative options to be able to respond to those threats to its own security. And this is what Sergei is observing. It's a tool that is maybe in transition, a stepping stone to something else. And that's one of the creative ways that Beijing is using to respond to those threats.
So I want to put a question to you, to Sergei, that came up in your remarks in the paper. You mentioned that private security companies are likely to be, not necessarily paramilitary, but rather focused on things like surveillance and information security. So given the limitations of the private security companies and the fact that other Chinese firms create those capabilities, do you expect this private security work to be done by specialized private security companies, or should we expect actually some of these companies, for example, a Huawei, or maybe even DJI, or weapons companies like Norinco and Poly, to actually be the ones that step into this private security?
Yes, well, thank you very much for the question, Peter. Let me first put one remark on what Nadij said before. So what is interesting is that when Russia was thinking about creation of its private military companies back in 2010, the General Staff of the Russian Federation actually saw the development of Russia's private military companies along the line that, in a way, at least in a way, goes hand in hand with what we are seeing in Chinese practices. So they did not think about the Russian private military companies being entitled to perform a strictly military role or participate in wars, but rather something that falls in the category of Blackwater or other Western companies. But as you saw, things took a very completely different turn after 2013, 14, 15 at that time. So no one knows how things might develop in the Chinese and with the Chinese. And Peter, answering your question, well, Alessandro wrote this excellent book, so I think he should also contribute to this question, because he actually discussed drones, artificial intelligence, things like this, as one of the areas that could be performed by the private security companies, and we discussed this also during our conversation in the beginning of the project. Yes, I think that, in my view, again, I think that definitely instead of developing paramilitary or military, like the Russian side, functions and performing military tasks, I think some Chinese private security companies will be closely working. And in my report, I think I already mentioned that they are actually working, at least on some occasions, with Huawei, with some other tech giants from China. And I think this work will be mainly visible through safe cities projects, something that we've experienced, something that we've seen on a large scale in Central Asia. And in some other regions. So I think that, yes, we should not exclude this. And Alex, if you could contribute to this, I know you have wealth of knowledge on this area.
Thank you, Sergei. Always too kind. Just one sentence. Yes, if we look at the new strategic frontier, definitely Chinese private security are going to be there. And let me say, are already there. You mentioned Central Asia. I was in the region for more than 2 months, not long ago. So if you are in area like Dushanbe, except for 2 government palaces built by the Chinese, all the other investment, especially in the mining sector, are very far from the eyes and are protected by Chinese private security. If we move in much safer country like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, where their military and security service are extremely able to provide security, then there is no need. But there are Chinese private security, not registered, of course, as private security, that provide new technology, not only drone, I will mention it, but AI, facial recognition, crowd control, that it started to be used in area when there are a lot of Chinese workers that need to be managed. But then this kind of product has been percolating in Africa, and especially now in the Middle East and in the Gulf region. So we see Chinese private security becoming in some way of ambassador or cybersecurity technology. Less in Central Asia for a very simple reason. Huawei and ZTE are there.
So I want to direct a question to you, Paul, because you mentioned some engagement with Chinese officials on this issue. And the question is, given the popularity of Wolf Warrior films, the sort of the encouragement of hawkish national sentiment online, the complaints, sort of a view about a relative lack of security, do you think the PLA leaders or party leaders feel pressure from Chinese citizens that they need to take a more muscular approach to protecting Chinese individuals and interests abroad? Is this something, or do you think that this kind of sentiment is something that's not really affecting them, or that they just kind of wash off?
Okay, yeah, let me thank you, Peter. Let me just clarify that it's not officials, but Chinese scholars I heard some of these or rather some of these issues were expressed to me by Chinese scholars. But look, you look at Wolf Warrior 1 and 2, and then there's a new one. There's a new movie that was out, so more or less along the same lines. There is a body of opinion in China that is openly pushing or rather applying pressure, applying different pressures of different types. A lot of it through social media. Whenever there's an attack in Mali, for instance, if you look at WeChat and you look at this attack on Chinese personnel in Mali at Radisson Blu Hotel, there's always an upsurge of, well, there's two elements that always come out on Chinese social media when events like that occur. The one is, what are we doing there? What are we doing there? What interest are we serving? Especially because there are problems right here at home in China. So that's the first sentiment that you hear, and that is a sentiment that is also expressed sometimes by Chinese scholars. Then the other sentiment is, why don't we have the capability to prevent such attacks, to protect such personnel, or to lean on these governments that receive all this aid, that receive all these loans? Can't they do something? So these are the two elements that you hear whenever incidents like that occur. The Chinese social media users reacted to the Chimbolo attack in the Central African Republic. 2 days ago, there was a Chinese mine that was attacked in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think the Chinese government is very aware of those sentiments, because if you look at what MSS is saying, MSS is saying that over 75% of Chinese high-value Belt and Road investments and economic investments are in unstable and fragile context. Now, I don't think it gets more clear than that. I don't think it gets clearer than that. So there is a conversation. There is a conversation within the PLA. In fact, some of the PLA writings have tried to preempt that discussion, to basically say, yes, we're supposed to be a global force. We've been directed by the party to be a global force by 2049. We've got to develop these power projection capabilities. We've got to develop logistics. And everything the PLA is doing, a lot of the work it's doing, if you look at Africa, for instance, with these anti-piracy patrols that have become longer in duration, more sophisticated, we've seen the deployment of newer and newer capabilities in those types of operations. It's to develop this. It's precisely to develop this, to develop these capabilities and to test them as much as possible. So yes, I think that the evidence is showing us that that there's that pressure. There are those concerns that are being expressed, and even state-owned enterprises, as I mentioned earlier, after the attacks in Juba, there was a conference, and this was specifically mentioned that part of Xi Jinping's responsibility should be to ensure that there's an adequate security blanket that is provided overseas. And so they're talking about establishing these security compounds. I think they've done that to some extent in Pakistan. So yes, there is that pressure. The PLA is reacting to it. But I don't think there's consensus within the PLA about what to do. I think the discussion is such that yes, these sentiments are being recognized. There's a sense that China should be more muscular, if only to ensure that these sprawling interests are adequately protected. As to what the PLA will do, is really an open question. There hasn't been much systematic talk about how the PLA will protect One Belt, One Road, right? Other than broad statements that the PLA broadly supports, the idea that you have all these activities and Belt and Road. It's important. It's important to Xi Jinping. It's important to the party, and therefore it's important to the PLA. As to what the PLA will actually do, this is another question altogether. So I think that's what I would say regarding that particular question.
Right. Well, we've reached time, so I want to thank all of you that have stayed with us and listened to this quite rich conversation. I want to congratulate Sergey on getting this project done and the final paper coming out. I recommend everyone go to the website. It's been a little shaky because of some maintenance issues, but hopefully everything will be smooth soon. And we will also send out the papers, as I mentioned, to everyone who registered to attend the discussion. But a big congratulations to Sergey. That's a wonderful series of papers, and thank you so much. And thank you as well to Nadej and to Alex and to Paul for their participation and commentary and helping provide some additional context and understanding about the work that Sergey has done and how this builds up into a more comprehensive picture of what the party state is doing out in the world. So thank you very much. I hope you all have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.